There we go. All right, hi everyone. Thank you for joining today. Yeah, I appreciate you all making some time, and I think this is a good, refresher for those who've led courses before, but also since we have a lot of new leaders, a good time to connect, kind of get on the same page in terms of summer receipts and accounting, and then also introduce the travel office and controller team as well. So I am recording this, but we have kind of a basic agenda to go through, some things to show you, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end as well. So Sue-Ann and Lee, do you want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Sure, my name is Sue-Ann DeTemple. I'm the controller.
I'm Lee Trutman, and I'm the travel coordinator for the university.
And then Brent, do you want to say hi quick? I think you know everyone on here, but just in case you haven't met someone.
Sure. Good morning. Brent Blahnik, Director of the Office of International Education.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen here just to share the agenda. We're keeping this relatively informal, but this is what we wanted to go through today. So I'll turn it over to Sue-Ann and Lee in just a second here, but we want to kind of talk about, first the timeline. So most of you have received information to confirm a travel authorization. We'll talk about kind of that travel advance timeline, what that means, and kind of next steps and things to look, for coming up for summer. We'll talk a little bit about examples in terms of documents, what you'll be receiving before you leave in terms of a folder. We'll talk about best practices, and then when you come back from your travel course, the OIE will help you complete an expense report, and we'll kind of touch on that briefly, so you can kind of prepare for that in advance and what you would need to drop off in our office afterward and the timeline for that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Sue-Ann and Lee to kind of talk about the first couple of things. And again, let me know if you want me to share anything. I have examples and things up on the hold up here.
Okay, the big thing with travel advances is we need time here in the controller's office to process those advances. So we like to see at least a 2-week notice for a travel advance. That gives us time to do what we need to do on our end and then get that check or deposit to you.
So with that, you'll all have kind of a final meeting before departure with Brent and someone else in the OIE. And at that point, you'll kind of go over the budget, figure out what is left in the budget to bring with you abroad, and that is what we call the cash advance or travel advance. So those are funds to be spent on the ground, whether that be dispersed directly to students in terms of like a meal allowance, something like that, or funds that you need on the ground in terms of buying train tickets or paying for tours or things like that that we can't do in advance. So that's what the travel cash advance is. We kind of use those words a little bit interchangeably, but you'll go over that amount at that final meeting, and then that should be far enough in advance to turn in the paperwork to get that information. Lee, correct me, but I believe it's still direct deposit into their accounts, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you all get a direct deposit of that full advance into an account. So because all of you are on 2 leader programs, you need to choose one person to be in charge of finances, and that is where the advance will go. That person is in charge of that travel advance. And the other leader can assist and help gather receipts, things like that, but that main person is going to be the name on that advance. So that person will get that amount in ahead of time, again, hopefully within that couple weeks before you leave, so you have time to either withdraw the money that you need, organize it in the way you need to in terms of bringing it abroad, or moving it to an account that makes the most sense for you. And feel free, Lee and Sue, to kind of jump in with this. In terms of the advance, what a lot of faculty have done, you can really, use that advance in terms of spending it, whatever works best for you in your course. So some faculty find it better to bring cash because it's a cash economy. Some find it better to use a debit card abroad, and maybe you create a separate account just for the travel course. I know a lot of faculty have done that through the UW Credit Union and have a separate debit card just for the travel course. It kind of helps us keep finances and things a little bit more separate. So you can kind of figure out what works best for you in your course. In terms of dispersing money to students, there are different ways to do it. There's not, an amazing way to do it because all it involves giving money to students. So all of you have some sort of disbursement to give to students. It might be a small amount, it might be a large amount. It depends on the course and what you are doing with it. Generally, because that money is coming into that designated leader's account, it has to be removed from that account and given to students. The best way that, currently best practice to do that is to give it to them at the beginning of the program, either at the airport or on the bus if you're taking a bus down. And then the student is responsible for those funds from there on forward. They sign for the funds saying that they received the amount, and then they are responsible for that. They sign, a piece of paper. I'll show you what that example is. That, it is for this amount and is supposed to be for these particular things. Some faculty choose to split that. They give some at the beginning of the program, some halfway through. Some do it all at the beginning. It's really up to you and what works best for your program. So you kind of want to think about that. There really isn't a great way in order to give students money before the program starts because of that timeline and getting the advance to you. Also figuring it out how to get it to students when they're not on campus, it's summer, things like that. So there's not really, one way to do it. It's kind of what works out best for you and your program. Does that make sense? If there's any questions, just kind of put your hand up or feel free to put something in the chat as well. Lee and Suan, do you have anything to add to those two things?
Marcelo, did you have a question?
Oh, well, this can come later, but I just spoke with the UW Credit Union. What I usually do is once I know what the cash advance is, the credit union needs to order that amount, and they gave me a date that I needed to get it to them in order for them to have the cash flow. But we can talk about that later.
Yep.
But that's one way to do it is to work with the credit union. I've been doing it for years, and they've been great, and it hasn't had much of a problem.
Yep. So again, it's whatever works best for your program. With Ecuador, that's kind of the method that works the best. Other countries, it might be easier to use a debit card once you're there, things like that. So it kind of depends on your program and what works best. So we can talk about that if you haven't gone to that location before and figure that out. Others, we can have that conversation too. See here, in terms of timeline of receipts and things. So when you're abroad, anything from the advance, you need to collect a receipt for. So a receipt includes that amount sent to given to students. They sign what's called a cash disbursement form. That is their receipt for those funds. If you're giving money to yourself in terms of a per diem, in terms of meal allowance, you also need to sign that same receipt. And then that is the only thing for that money. So for example, if you're giving everyone $50 for meals, not included, that are already prepaid, you also need to sign for that 50 as well. And then that is the only receipt we need for that amount of money. Anything else needs a receipt. So if you're taking public transportation, if you buy a group meal, if you pay for a tour, we need receipts for that because we need to account for that in the advance afterward. As detailed of a receipt as you can get, and we'll talk about what happens if you don't have a receipt in a second. But as detailed of a receipt as you can for that. After you come back from your program, again, this is still kind of talking about timeline. The OIE will help you complete a travel expense report. We call it for short a TER. That's basically taking the advance. So you get $2,000 in advance. We have to account for that amount in terms of receipts. Anything that is underspent. So if you only spent $1,900, we need that $100 back. If you overspend the advance for some reason, if it's course related, we'll see what's left in the budget and hopefully reimburse you that amount over as well. All right. Anything Controller Travel Office, Brent, want to add to that before we kind of move on to just some examples?
Well, we do want to stress that receipts need to be in and the TER needs to be completed within 90 days from the end of your travel date.
Rebecca, I'm not 100% understanding your question. We budgeted for a per diem for students. That is the meal allowance that we call, that I explained, that you give to the students at the beginning of the program. They sign for it, and then they're responsible for that money.
Okay.
So because you're,
we need
just
to give it to them. Okay.
Yep. Let me finish. So you're giving it to them likely in cash. They really don't have a better way to do it at this point. So you'll need to have that conversation with students in what is the best way to turn that cash into the local currency. Do they exchange it at the airport? Do they exchange it the day of? You know, do they put it in their pocket and then they withdraw their own money from an ATM and they reimburse themselves from that amount? It's a conversation depending on the student, what's the best fit for them, but your responsibility is to give them that amount, they sign for it, and then it is their responsibility. Does that make sense?
Okay, so yes, except if we're going to a place that largely isn't a cash economy, we then need to emphasize to them that they can only spend this where cash is taken. Is that correct?
No, that basically the students they're reimbursing. I mean, there's a way that you can take it as they reimburse themselves. So for example, you give me $200 in cash, I put that in my pocket. I spend money out of my debit account. When I get home, I deposit that $200. Does that make sense? Or they can spend the cash.
Okay,
it's really,
thanks.
you know, it's up to each student kind of what works best for them. But we can currently right now, we can only give students
Okay.
cash. We can't do any other option to give students money.
Okay. Okay.
Perfect. All right, so to give you a couple examples of these, you'll all get a folder in that kind of final meeting before you leave with paper copies of student passports, vaccination cards if it's required for your program, insurance cards, all these different things. As part of that, you'll get paper copies of budget items. So I want to give you an example here of what you'll see. One of them is a blank receipt. So if you're not able to get a receipt for some reason, whether it be you forgot, whether it be it's just, you know, it's a roadside stand that you get snacks for the group and there's just not a receipt. There's many different reasons why you don't get a receipt. Totally fine. Excuse me, you can fill out one of these official receipts. You're going to get a big one, and then we also put what I call mini receipts in your folder as well. They're just pocket size. They're the exact same. It really doesn't matter which one you use. One might just be easier for you to carry around than a full-size sheet of paper. For those of you going to Spanish-speaking countries, we have a Spanish version of this as well. So really, you're going to fill out the top part to the best of your ability. So again, if it's, you know, a roadside stand selling snacks, you're not going to maybe not have an official business name or whatnot, but put as much information as you can. If it's, for example, a taxi, maybe putting up where it picked you up from, where it's dropping you off to. Again, as much information as possible. If you can get a signature, great. If you can't, if it's not culturally appropriate, that's okay, because your signature is going to be at the bottom. So again, get as much information as you can. Make sure the bottom part is filled out. So what it is for, the date, the amount, if it's in US dollars or other currency, paid in full, this is where you would sign for it as the leader, and then when that date is, and that is accounting for that money spent. So that is a receipt for that money. Whether it is a debit card, cash, you know, whatever, if you can't get an itemized receipt, please fill out one of these for that amount. I say with a credit card as well, because sometimes when you pay by a credit card, you don't get an itemized receipt. You just get that little slip with the card, and that doesn't really tell you anything about it. So here's that example of the blank receipt. In terms of other things you might see, you'll see a handful of these as well. So there are different categories that we try to group receipts in. So try to group them in transportation, food and meals, lodging, and other. So transportation could be anything related to transportation. So bus and train tickets, luggage fees falls in here if you need to pay for luggage at the airport. I don't think any of the people in this group need to, but there are other programs that do that. You know, again, anything kind of in that realm would go under this kind of transportation category. Food and meals would be group meals. So this is not where you would do those meal allowances that you give to students. This would be if you pay for a group meal for everyone, a group snack, something like that. That would go under that food and meals. Lodging is just what it is. If you need to pay for lodging on the ground, keeping that receipt, recording it on that page. And then other is really kind of a catch-all for anything else. So if you have, you know, a tip for a tour guide, for example, you pay for museum fees. If you need to buy, you know, pay for COVID tests on the ground, for example, that's all under other. It's a catch-all for anything else. These are meant for your organization purposes. These are not official forms whatsoever. These are more for your organization purposes, and also to make your lives and our lives easier when you bring those receipts back, to help kind of categorize them in advance. This also helps you, you know, depending on how you organize yourself in terms of accounting, help you stay on budget as well. So you kind of know in advance, okay, I'm bringing this amount with me. I know I have to pay for the hotel. I know I have to pay for this. This will kind of help you stay organized a little bit as well, help you kind of track your spending. Our office does use these to help organize the travel expense report, but we don't include this in what is sent to UW system because sometimes it's more of a chicken scratch than anything else. It's more of an organizational tool. Sometimes we have to cross things out, move things to other categories, whatnot, and it kind of confuses the auditors. So we just use these as more organization. And let me show you that expense report as well. Let's see here. Here we go. So this is that cash disbursement log I was telling you about. So if you're giving money to students and to yourself at the beginning of the program, or if you're doing a second time during your, you'll get a sheet that already has the names listed on here, and then you can put the amount, and then everyone signs off on it. Just make sure you put the date on here, and then if you do more than one, you can always handwrite names in there as well if you need to do it more than once. But this is what that log looks like. Again, that's the receipt for those allowances to students and to yourself in advance, from the advance, I should say. All right. Questions on that, on those kind of example forms? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lee and to Sue-Ann to talk through the travel course accounting manual, as well as kind of best practices to record receipts and things like that, if you two want to take over.
Gemma, are they going to be doing their own TER, or does
the OIE will assist? Yep.
Will assist. Okay. So entering your TER at the end, we just want to make sure that all receipts are readable and detailed. Because the auditors need to be able to see these receipts and match up what your advance was, what you spent, and so forth.
Lee, do you want to kind of go through some kind of major high-level kind of policies and what we can and can't accept in terms of receipts? I guess highlighting a few things from that manual.
Well, and when you do the air travel, your office is booking all of that, correct, Gemma?
Yes.
So we go through Fox World Travel for that, and they're going to update you on any changes to your airfare and so forth. Let's see.
Yeah. Here, I'll jump in here if you don't mind. Let me share a page here. So a couple things to kind of keep in mind in terms of what you can and can't spend travel advance money on. Obviously, spending it on things for the group, for the program itself. If you disperse money to students, it has to be the same amount. Everyone has to get the same amount. So whether that be for, giving the money to purchase tickets, giving the money for that, for food, everything, it has to be the same amount to each student. Also, it's best practice to not spend any money on individual students unless it's, unavoidable situation. So for example, if a student gets ill, you need to take them in a cab to a clinic, ideally that's something we can file for insurance, and it should not come out of the advance. It should come out of either the student's funds or something like that. If there's a situation that's just not possible at that moment, we can figure it out, but ideally to kind of keep those kind of expenses separate. Because students do have insurance that we can file claims and things like that. We can file claims for those kind of expenses. Again, sometimes situations come up where it's just unavoidable. You have to make a decision in the moment. You just need to do that, and then we can kind of sort that out a little bit later. If you do a group meal, we do need an itemized receipt. The auditors are pretty specific about that. Yes, it's annoying. We don't like it either. We do have to translate from another language into English as well. So again, it's not ideal. It's not really what we want to be doing, but it's something the auditors at UW System are requesting. So please get itemized receipts wherever you can. And then, if you're able to kind of do a translation in advance, otherwise our office will work with you on that when you come back. we cannot record any alcohol on any receipts. So if that's part of an itemized receipt, you just cross it off, and then we would accept the receipt for the advance or for the total minus that alcohol amount. What I've done in the past with students is if they choose to, purchase a beverage, they, reimburse you back, or if it's possible at the restaurant to put those on a different receipt. I know it's not always possible depending on where you're at, what the restaurant's able to do. So if it's on the receipt, just cross it off. And I usually just have students just hand me cash at the table. Your beverage was $5 or €5 or whatever it was. Just give me that. So then you can put that kind of back in the pot per se, and you're not paying for that alcohol out of the travel advance funds. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, if something, you need to purchase something for one particular student, we need to have that reasoning behind it. And again, sometimes we need to have those recording, then we can send that for insurance for a claim. For example, you bring a student to a pharmacy, something like that. They really need to be paying for those items on their own. Again, there might be a situation that you just can't avoid. We'll figure that out, but as much as possible, having the students do that is something, if it's for that insurance claim, to just kind of keep it clean and separate for that expense report, because those are not accepted expenses. So here's kind of that list on here as well. So this is in this manual that you will all get a paper copy of. It's also on our website as well, so you can always get a PDF copy of that later too. I will be sending everyone kind of this PDF as well as a cash advance manual, a couple other things that Lee sent to me. I'll send to everyone after this as well. So you just have those as reference to save. Lee, Sven, anything else to kind of mention in this manual?
Lee, the other thing I was going to mention was if you're paying for like a group dinner, it's assumed that everybody on the group is participating, because we do need a list of attendees for any group meals that are purchased. So if for some reason somebody was not with you, you would just want to make note of who maybe wasn't there. Or if you had an additional person with you, maybe
like the bus driver or something.
Giving you a tour type of a thing that you're also paying for, to include that individual's name for that meal that they might be joining you with. And then Gemma, you take care of the currency conversions, right? Because obviously the receipts you get will be in the foreign currency.
Yep.
So you take care of that for them.
Well, I won't be taking care of it, but someone will.
Or doing the math for it, whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what's handy with that is if you, so there's two ways to kind of let us know the currency conversion. So one, if you pay anything by card, to get us a copy of your credit card statement after you return. So it shows what the charges are, what the foreign currency charges are. We can use that exact exchange rate. If you use cash and you do a currency conversion, keeping those receipts of however you convert that currency, whether it be in advance, at the airport, on site. If you withdraw money from an ATM, usually your bank will have a conversion rate on your statement. Just giving all that information to us, to our office, we can do those currency conversions. Worst case scenario, we'll do the daily rate based on a site called OANDA, O-A-N-D-A, which is UW system standard for currency conversion. So if we don't have anything else, we'll just use a conversion rate from that site on that day for those expenses. All right, great. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So a couple other kind of notes and, oh, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I just have a quick, this is really great because you reminded me of all the things we used to do, and it's been a while. But when the bus driver takes us to different places, I usually buy him the meal. So I would get my receipt and it would include his. So on the receipt, should I put with bus driver to make so that people will know that it's not me eating all of that stuff, but it's actually two people?
Yep, just make a note on the receipt, or you can, if the receipt is too tiny or it makes more sense, you can put it in the email. So this receipt for this amount is for myself and for the driver.
Okay.
Or lunch on this day, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes, depending on the size, there might not be a lot of room on there.
Right.
But, what I've done in the past, and hopefully, Brent and whoever's kind of taking my place will do the same as, I tape all receipts to an 8x11 sheet of paper, because then I can scan them all in easily. So we can always put notes on that piece of paper as well.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So we did want to touch a little bit because every group this summer is with 2 leaders and kind of managing receipts with 2 leaders. Brent, did you want to jump in on this at all, or do you want me to kind of keep going?
You can keep going.
Okay. So like I was kind of saying at the beginning, you know, it's picking that one person to be, you know, kind of the name on the advance. So you can kind of talk between yourselves with the 2 leaders and who's going to be that person, and that person's in charge of the funds, in charge of the receipts, in charge of submitting the expense report, and their name is tied to the advance. The second leader, the second person, you know, is helping with that, but they're not going to be that primary. So, you know, best practice or kind of best advice for that, kind of what I've done in the past when I've been on a 2-leader program, I've been in charge of funds, is really, you know, kind of figuring out what that other person might need. And so if you're splitting up for the day, you know, making sure that person has the funds that they need, or collecting receipts from that person. So if they, you know, if you split up, for example, I know Lydia and Lisa are doing different groups kind of around New York. So if, you know, one person pays for the group somewhere, keeping that receipt, giving it to the primary travel advance person so they can record that receipt at the end of the day. And then there's really no mixture of funds. You're all kind of coming from that same pot. We want to try and keep things as clean as possible. So, you know, having one person make as many of the payments as possible is going to keep things a little bit more organized. But what I have done is I've kind of given, I'm going to use the word allowance for lack of a better word, saying, okay, you need $300 to kind of do these different things. And then I get those receipts or that extra money back to keep things organized. You know, again, you'll kind of figure out between the 2 of you what's kind of the best way to do that, what you need and don't need to do depending on your program. It could be very, very different. Some of your programs, pretty much everything is paid in advance. You really won't need to do a lot of things on the ground. But just kind of keep that in mind that we don't want to be mixing money and kind of moving things back and forth, because that would just make things more complicated back when you bring receipts back. Kind of other best practices with receipts that I've found helpful, and anyone who's led a course before, feel free to jump in as well, is I kind of go through every night and write down all the receipts for the day. I collect them all, I organize them, I write them down in those cover sheets, I guess, for lack of a better word, I showed you, just to kind of keep myself organized and kind of know what I might have. I do check, you know, if I pay things by card, I check the bank account every couple days to kind of make sure, you know, I'm on track in terms of payments, currency conversions, things like that. So I kind of know what money's remaining in there. It's helpful for when you bring things back, but also just to help remember things as well. You can kind of put notes in there. Send this if you need to do a blank receipt, you kind of put it in, write it out right away. So you're not trying to remember that. During the day, what I do is I just keep my phone. I just have a notes app up in my phone. I just put the notes in all day. I have a separate spot in my bag, my travel bag I bring with me all day, that I put receipts. And then I put a little note in my phone so that at the end of the day, I can pull out all the receipts. I pull up my phone notes and I kind of write everything down so I don't have to remember it later. When you come back from your course, you know, please try to kind of organize the receipts, put down any notes you can think of before giving them to the OIE. It just helps the process move a little bit more smoothly. Once you get your credit card statements and things like that, please just submit them. You can always black out any private information. All we need is just to know the name on the account, the last 4 digits of the card number so we can match it up with any charges. But then you can black out any other expenses that are personal, address on there, the rest of the account number. That's definitely fine to do. We just need some sort of identifier on the statement, and then any charges related to the course. We want to keep your information private. Questions? Okay, so last couple things I want to show. I'm going to show some examples of the Excel forms that we kind of use in our office to organize the expense report, and then maybe if Lee or Sue-Ann can kind of show the online version of that expense report, what it might look like. So the OIE will help basically organize this Excel sheet in advance, send it to you as a faculty leader to kind of approve, and we have questions, we'll go back and forth on that. We enter it in online for you, and then you just need to go in and approve it. But it's good for you to know kind of what it looks like online, because if you go through it, it might look a little bit different. So if that makes sense, I'm going to pull up an example. So this is a blank one here of kind of the organizing Excel sheet that we use for receipts. So this is kind of the summary sheet here. So your program, the currency, the main leader's name, so the person in charge of the advance would be here. And this is kind of a summary. So this is where we put all the cash disbursements, so any money that's out to students. And then we have a tab for each of those categories I was showing you earlier. So this would be where we enter the receipts, the purpose, and then the amount, whether it's the US dollar or the currency, then converted into US dollar. We also mark if it's a credit card or cash payment. Once this is all entered in here, we also have a spot for any currency because we can cover expenses for currency commission charges. We can put that in here as well. These are the numbers that we use to put in the online expense report form that's submitted to UW System. UW System uses the online version, but I like to use this Excel version, one, because I find it easier to read and organize, especially sending to you as leaders. And then two, it kind of helps get everything organized before we upload everything into the system because it does look a little bit different. So let me show you one that is completed to kind of give you another example here. So this is one that was completed for one of the winter courses. You can kind of see the total here, different receipts. We had a local currency, we converted it into US dollars. This was off of a credit card receipt. We had a couple other expenses in here, and then the totals came up here. So then this should match what is in the travel advance and then what the amount is in the expense report. So that's kind of the goal here, is to have those numbers match up. Again, if you are underspending the advance, totally fine. We would just need that amount back to the OIE. And if you're overspending the advance, if it's for travel course purposes and there's money in the budget, we can reimburse you for some of those maybe unexpected expenses. Okay. Go ahead, Lee.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen to show where you do the e-reimbursement. You're going out to Wisconsin.edu travel site and e-reimbursement login. And you're going to go to the expense tile, create an expense report. And you do your business purpose up here, travel.
It's study abroad, and yep, the OIE will do this part for all the leaders. Just as a heads up. Okay.
So are they going to be entering any expense lines or anything like that, or?
It's basically they're going to be checking what the OIE enters.
Okay.
So just more of just to see what it looks like. So because it's going to look obviously different than that Excel sheet.
Right. And I don't know that we even have an expense.
Do you have an example?
Show them.
Lee, if you want to look up Shara's from when they went to Cuernavaca, I have the expense report number. If you want to bring that up in SFS, in the e-reimbursement or in the expense work center, we can share that one with them so they can kind of see how that looks.
Perfect. Yeah, so while they're pulling that up, right now, all of you again are approving that travel authorization online. This is another approval that you'll need to do an approval for the cash advance. This is another approval. And what we're really doing again is because we have to enter everything in this online site just so you're familiar with what it looks like. So when you are approving it as the leader, you're kind of understanding what you're seeing is kind of what the goal of this is here.
Lee, I have the report number. It's in the chat. If you can see that, it's 883030.
Okay. Okay. So if we go to the expense detail, this is what you're going to be reviewing. Travel miscellaneous, these were COVID tests for return to the US. This is how much was spent, baggage fees. It's all sorted out by the actual expense. Meals hosted, if you had any meals that you were hosting, airfare, travel agent service fee. This is a fee that we're charged by Fox World Travel to actually book these tickets. And then any other miscellaneous expenses, the thank you for the program director.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it looks
the attachments are all listed as well. So if you're reviewing this, you're going to want to make sure that everything has been entered.
Mhm. Yeah, so on that first page, it looks a little bit different from that Excel sheet in terms of those category names and things, but the amount should be matching up. And then those attachments, we scan in all those receipts, we scan in statements, we scan in that Excel sheet. So all those attachments should be there as well.
And that's where these all are.
Yep.
Did you want me to show them any of this kind of stuff?
Nope, I think it's just more to look and see. And this is, again, if the auditor kind of reviews this and comes back and needs more information, this is where we would need to add it, and where our office would maybe ask you to send more details, send an email explaining something, and we would upload that to this attachment area. So everything's kind of stored here. So the important things for you as leaders to know is just, where to find this information if you need to go back and look into it. And when you're reviewing it for approval, this is what it looks like. So you kind of know what those charges look like compared to what that Excel sheet is, if that makes sense. So the amount should match up, but it just looks slightly different. We don't have the expense type in that Excel sheet, but the description should match and things like that as well. Does anyone have questions on that? Thank you for showing that. Okay, again, you'll look at this more when you come back, but we wanted just to kind of let you know what it looks like, what you'll be seeing. So that maybe will help you kind of organize things in advance. Last thing I wanted to mention about receipts that I forgot to mention before, but that report made me remember it, is in terms of gifts, we are not allowed to give gifts as part of a travel advance unless, Suann, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's under $25 and it's UWGB related paraphernalia, is that correct?
Correct. That's the UW system policy for giving gifts to individuals.
Yep.
That's correct.
So, keep that in mind. Some other appropriate things to thank someone is maybe to take them to dinner with the group and then you're paying for their meal. Sometimes we can do an honorarium, not an honorarium per se, but like a fee. So if someone gives a lecture to you, gives a guide, maybe a tip, or a stipend of some sort to pay them for that service or that experience. So those are other ways to do, what we call, quote, thank yous that are not a gift per se. So if you have questions on that, definitely ask, the travel office, ask our office on what's appropriate or not. But those are some ideas. So, again, that under 25 amount of UWGB paraphernalia, or, doing like a dinner and including them in that, or doing some sort of like a stipend or a tip if it's appropriate for that particular service. So kind of keep that in mind in terms of those things. Looks like Val has a question popping in here. So does anyone else have any? Suann, is that correct? They just bring the receipt and we can include that as part of the advance, or is there another process for that?
You can include it as part of the advance. Either way would be fine. So if it's part of the advance, it would account for that way. Otherwise, it would still be included on the expense report just as a reimbursement to the individual.
Okay, perfect.
I have a quick question. I was used to getting your Excel report, and it was really easy for us to go through it.
Yep.
I would guess now I'm going to be looking at that new report, the one that you showed us. And
you'd be doing both. So ideally, again, since I'm leaving, I can't really make someone do what I was doing in the past, but that Excel report is, I made that template because it was easy for faculty to kind of go through and read. So what my process was is I would, put that together. I would send it to you and we would kind of go over questions and kind of quote that Excel. Yeah. Then I would enter everything online and then you would get the online to approve because that's the official way to do it. So we kind of do the Excel sheet internally to kind of answer questions and get things organized. And then we would put everything online in that TravelWise that Lee had shown. And that's what officially has to be approved through UW system.
Right.
So you're kind of approving things twice, but we kind of do that Excel first because again, it's a little bit easier to read and organize.
Yeah, I agree.
Use that information to put on.
You spoiled me, Gemma.
All right, so that's kind of what we wanted to cover today. So there's a little bit of time for questions if anyone has any questions. Any previous leaders have any kind of best practices, feedback, advice to kind of give to our new leaders who are joining us. Anything like that from Lee or Suann or Brent, anything else to add that I had missed we want to kind of touch on a little bit more?
I just want to say a couple of things that you have been wonderful in all these years. Gemma, I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
And for everyone here, you taught me how to do the daily or every night. That suggestion, I would really suggest that everyone would do that with your receipts. It organizes me every night, and I put it in the right envelope. This is something that Gemma, you introduced me to many years ago, and it's the best way to keep things in line because receipts can be kind of messy. And just getting these receipts and then have a pile of receipts and then figure out which goes to transportation, which goes to lodging, which goes to this. If you guys can do it every night, I would strongly suggest that you do that. It makes life easier when you get back.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Anyone else with questions, or it can be specific, it can be general? Going once. Any last minute thoughts from Lee, Sue-Ann, Brent? All right, well, thank you all for joining this morning. Like I said, I am recording this. Once I get the recording, we'll have it on file. So if you do, I'll send it as part of kind of the summary email so you have it as well for kind of refreshers and things like that. It will be, available to future leaders as well. But if you have any other questions, please reach out. And yeah, have a great rest of your week. And then we will definitely be in touch this next week or so to move forward with the programs. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you, Gemma.
Bye.